This is lesson 13 in module 7 in week 7 of the course. In this lesson, we will be looking at several different but related publications. Specifically, we will examine NIST Special Publications 800-53, 53A, and 53B. We will also take a look at FIPS 199 and 200. Okay, let's look at the administrative comments for this lesson. Exam 1 is this week. Please don't forget about it. It must be completed by 11:59 p.m. on Friday, 6 March. It covers modules 1 through 6, which are lessons 1 through 12. It does not include this lesson, as this lesson is lesson number 13. It is worth 150 points. There is no review session this week, no Zoom review session this week, because I'll be out of town. I will post a video for a review session, however. I am out of town this week, but we'll be checking my emails in the early morning and the late evening. So if you have a question or an issue or problem or whatever, go ahead and email me. I may not get it until early in the morning or get to it early in the morning until late at night, but I will be checking each day, both the morning and night. As with the other NIST publications we have looked at before, the ones we will examine today are also available for free to download, and all of them go through periodic updates so that they stay current, some a little bit more current than others. In fact, 2 of the documents are on their 5th revision. NIST Special Publication 800-53, Revision 5, is entitled Security and Privacy Controls for Information Systems and Organizations. Revision 5 of this document was released in 2020. According to the document itself, it is intended to provide a catalog of security and privacy controls for information systems and organizations to protect organizational operations and assets, individuals, other organizations, and the nation from a diverse set of threats and risks, including hostile attacks, human errors, natural disasters, structural failures, foreign intelligence entities, and privacy risks. What this means is that the document contains a number of actual security controls that you could implement in your organization. The document is rather lengthy as it describes all of the controls in its 492 pages. NIST Special Publication 800-53A Revision 5 is a companion document to 800-53 Rev 5. It is entitled Assessing Security and Privacy Controls in Information Systems and Organizations. Revision 5 of this publication was released in 2022. The document is intended to provide a methodology and set of procedures for conducting assessments of security and privacy controls employed within systems and organizations within an effective risk management framework. What the document is saying there is that it contains recommendations on how you can assess whether the controls you selected from 800-53 are working and doing what you needed them to do. It is even longer than 800-53, consisting of 733 pages. NIST Special Publication 800-53B is another companion document for both 853 and 53A. It is entitled Controlled Baselines for Information Systems and Organizations. It is a much shorter document than either of its companions at only 85 pages. The document states that it provides 3 security control baselines, one for each system impact level, low impact, moderate impact, and high impact, as well as a privacy baseline that is applied to systems irrespective of impact level. In addition to the control baselines, this publication provides tailoring guidance. So if you don't know where to start, this document provides suggested controls that you can start with based on the impact level that you determine your organization should be addressing. Remember the 7-step process found in the description of the RMF in SP 800-37 that we've looked at several times before? The materials in the 853 documents will be useful in several of these steps. Let's review those specific steps. In the select step, the initial set of controls for the system will be chosen. This is where NIST Special Publication 800-53 and the controls found in that document come into play. You will tailor the controls as needed to reduce risk to an acceptable level based on a risk assessment. In the implement step, the selected controls are put into place and a description of how the controls are to be used is developed. And in the assess step, the controls are examined to see if they are implemented, operating, and producing the desired outcomes. These three steps are the ones that would be directly related to the material in the 53 series documents. The major effort associated with the NIST documents will be the select step, but the other two rely on what was decided in that step to accomplish what they are intended to do. Let's discuss the use of the 800-53 series of documents. As you conduct your security assessment and determine whether the level of risk is acceptable, you will want to consider additional security mitigating factors, including the addition of possible security controls. A great place to learn about security controls is NIST Special Pubs 800-53, now on revision 5. This document is supported by two other NIST publications, SP 800-53A, also on revision 5, and SP 800-53B. SP 800-53 Rev 5 identifies 20 categories of security controls, such as access controls, awareness and training, personnel security, and supply chain risk management, to name just a few. Remember that not all categories may be as applicable or may only be partially applicable to your specific organization. For example, some organizations will rely more heavily on their supply chain than others and thus may need to employ more security controls in this category. In each of these categories defined in 800-53, there are a number of specific control enhancements. For example, under the access control category, you will find security control information regarding remote access. SP 800-53A can then be used to further drill down into each of the security controls. In this companion document, you will find help to assist you in developing specific objectives for each control, as well as developing statements that can be used to define a way to assess the control. There are a lot of controls that are identified, and it could be very overwhelming, especially for small organizations. The good news is that you will likely not need all of the controls for your environment. It will depend on the level of risk there is to your organization and what level of risk you are willing to accept. SP 800-53B introduces the concept of a control baseline, which it defines as a collection of controls from SP 800-53 assembled to address the protection needs of a group, organization, or community of interest. It provides a generalized set of controls that represents a starting point for the subsequent tailoring activities that are applied to the baseline to produce a targeted or customized security and privacy solution for the entity that the baseline is intended to serve. Here is the full list of the 20 different categories, or as NIST describes them, families of security controls in 800-53. There is a lot of information in 800-53 and a lot of security controls. As mentioned earlier, the document is 492 pages long. It is important to mention that you absolutely do not have to implement all of the controls that are described in this document. You should only be implementing the ones that are applicable to you and that would address one or more of the risks that you have identified in your prioritized list of risks. Let's look at some of these families so you can get a feel for what is contained in the document. Here is the first part of the list for the access control family of controls. There are several pages of controls in this family, starting with control number AC-1, which you can see in the first column in the table. The numbers go up to AC-25. Notice that some controls have multiple parts to cover what the document refers to as enhancements. AC2, for example, covers account management, which in a previous version had 13 enhancements for it, though one of them has now been moved to another control group. The third column provides a code to tell you what entity will implement this control function. S stands for information system, thus it is the system itself that will handle this control. O stands for organization, meaning somebody in the organization will implement the control. O/S means that the control can be implemented by the organization, the system, or a combination of the two. Take a look at AC2 Supplement 3. If we look at the Implemented By column for this entry, it states the system will handle this. But wouldn't it seem more appropriate for an individual to handle this activity? In a few slides, we will take a look at this enhancement in more detail to see why the system will implement it. Looking at the last column now, marked Assurance, a control or control enhancement with a mark in the Assurance column indicates the control or control enhancement contributes to the grounds for confidence that a security or privacy claim has been or will be achieved. Here is another control family. This one is Table C-3, covering the Audit and Accountability family of security controls. Notice this control has several previous controls now incorporated into other controls and control families. Also, there are several more items marked in the Assurance column than we had in the portion of the Access Control family tables we looked at. Let's drill down into one of these to see what we might see if we clicked on the control number, which will take us to the section in 800-53 that talks about the control. Let's select the Audit Storage Capacity control. Notice that there is one enhancement for this control called Transfer to Alternate Storage. Special Publication 800-53 describes a number of controls that an organization can implement to form their security program. The basic structure for all of the defined controls is shown on this slide. Moving from the top of the structure downward, security and privacy controls have a base control section, a discussion section, a related controls section, a control enhancement section, and a references section. Some other items such as the control name and identifier are also part of the structure as shown here. The control section prescribes a security or privacy capability to be implemented. The discussion section provides additional information about the control. The related controls section provides a list of control identifiers from the list of controls in the document whose controls impact or support the implementation of a particular control or control enhancement, address a related security or privacy capability, or are referenced in the discussion section. The Control Enhancement section provides statements of security and privacy capability that augment a base control. And finally, the References section includes a list of applicable laws, policies, standards, guidelines, websites, and other useful references that are relevant to a specific control or control enhancement. Now, remember the enhancement we mentioned when we were discussing the access control family, disable accounts? Here is the entry for this enhancement. Remember we said this sounded like it might more appropriately be handled by an individual instead of the system. Well, if you look at what this enhancement specifically describes as to when accounts should be disabled, the listed item, with the possible exception of item C, can all be automated and would not need human interaction. Also notice in this description that there are two areas where an assignment is provided. SP 800-53 is giving you an assignment. You need to provide the information that will go into these two areas. This allows you to tailor controls and control enhancements to fit into your own specific environment. Here is a screen capture from the SP 800-53 document for the control AC-17, which is in the Access Control category. The specific control addresses remote access. Parts A and B define the actual controls. Notice they basically emphasize 2 points. First,
the specific requirements and restrictions to allow for remote access are defined. And second, the organization has to actually authorize the remote access types before connections are allowed. You can see how these two items can lead to a checklist item for an assessor to use to check the organization's compliance with this control. How an assessment can be designed and conducted is the topic of the companion document SP 800-53A.
Let's look at another potential control, this time IA2, Identification and Authentication Organizational Users. Notice that this control is nothing out of the ordinary. It states that you need to have a method to uniquely identify and authenticate users. This is very common. If you aren't sure exactly how to implement the control, the discussion provides more information that will explain the control more thoroughly. In this case, examples of ways to accomplish this control are provided, such as passwords, biometrics, etc. There were originally 13 control enhancements for IA2, though 5 have been withdrawn in revision 5. The first one of the ones that remain is shown here. Remember that the enhancements for a control offer additional options for implementing the control that may be applicable or valuable to your organization. This example proposes the use of multi-factor authentication for privileged accounts. This is a method that many organizations have implemented for all accounts in today's internet environment. If you aren't sure of what multi-factor authentication entails, the discussion section describes it more fully, explaining to you what authentication factors can include so you can make a decision as to what would work for your own environment. Here is another example of a control enhancement. This is control enhancement number 5 for IA2. This enhancement addresses environments in which shared accounts exist. This is more common in the OT environment than IT. This enhancement is really simple and is very short, as you can see here. It simply suggests that the organization should not allow the use of a shared account until the user has already individually been authenticated. As we mentioned before, not all enhancements and even not all controls may be applicable to your environment. This is a good example of that. If your organization does not allow group accounts, then this enhancement would not be applicable to you. Moving on to our next document in the SP 853 series, let's look at SP 800-53A. This document provides a process for assessing the security and privacy controls in organizational systems and environments of operation. This process is summarized in this chart from the document, which is a bit longer than 800-53. 53A, as mentioned previously, is 733 pages long. This chart contains a lot of information, and each section is explained in much greater detail in 800-53A. But for now, let's just summarize the 4 steps shown at the top. The first step is to prepare for security and privacy control assessments. There are a number of things that are included under this, but for now, just remember that this is where you are defining your security program and selecting the controls that you will be implementing. SP 800-53 is the document you will use for this. The next step is to develop security and privacy assessment plans. This is where SP 800-53A will be used as you look at the various controls you selected, then the assessment objectives from 800-53A, which we will discuss more in a few slides. The third step is to conduct security and privacy control assessments. This is based on the objectives that you developed in the previous step. And finally, after you have a written report from the assessment, you can analyze the assessment report results. Is there anything that you need to correct or improve upon? Anything that needs to be changed? The output for this step will be a revised set of security plans. This figure comes from 800-53A and illustrates an example assessment procedure developed to assess the effectiveness of control AC17, which we looked at a few slides ago. The assessment objective for AC17 is derived from the base control statement described in 800-53. Remember, when we looked at the control, we saw that it had two parts to it, labeled A and B. AC17A01 is an example of a determination statement for a control item that is further granularized from 800-53. Notice that it covers one aspect of the statement from the description from 800-53. The description said restrictions are established for each type of remote access allowed. This gets translated to the assessment objective highlighted in red on this diagram. 853 goes on to state that this also includes establishment of configuration or connection requirements and implementation guidance. These other two are also listed here in 53A, each becoming an additional assessment objective, so that we now have three assessment objectives. AC17B is an example of a determination statement for a control item that corresponds directly with the SP853 control. This is an example of the type of information that can be found in 53A. You can see how this documentation can help guide you in conducting an assessment of the control that had been specified in 800-53. The size of the documents together give you an idea of how extensive an assessment would be for an organization that implements all of the security controls found in 800-53. Let's look at another example of how 800-53 and 800-53A work together. Continuing on with the entry for AC17 in 53A, we can see an AC17B entry. Here is the second part of the statement from 800-53. This is again an example of a determination statement for a control item that corresponds directly with the 800-53 control. You can see how all of these assessment objectives can help guide you in conducting an assessment of the control that had been specified in 800-53. Let's look at another example of how 800-53 and 800-53A work together. After the assessment objectives section, there is another section in the entry. This next section provides some possible methods you can use to accomplish the objectives that were just identified. Notice that the potential assessment methods are broken down into three different types: examine, interview, and test. Also notice that, like an earlier document, NIST provides a sample of what you can choose from.
Here's the figure from SP 800-53A. Here is the description from SP 800-53 for CM-4. The CM category stands for Configuration Management. Notice that the control statement says Security and Privacy. The assessment objective then splits the one sentence into two assessment objectives, one for security and one for privacy. This allows the assessment to be more specific. If they are not split, then if either one of them was not accomplished, then the whole statement would have been marked as a fail. With them split, the specific one that has not been accomplished can be identified. Determination statements can also include organization-defined parameters, or ODPs, which are listed first and separately from the determination statements for each control item. This is done to enable the assessor to quickly determine whether the ODPs are defined or selected by the organization. ODPs appear first in the determination statements, and each includes a unique identifier associated with the control to facilitate a more efficient and streamlined assessment. This figure provides an example of an assessment procedure for control CM-02 baseline configuration that includes two organization-defined assignment operations, CM-02 ODP01 and CM-02 ODP-02. The control statement from 800-53 states that the organization should A. Develop, document, and maintain under configuration control a current baseline configuration of the system, and B. Review and update the baseline configuration of the system. Notice that the control does not mention how often this should be accomplished. The organization needs to define this, and an ODP was created to ensure that this has been accomplished. Also notice that later another assessment objective refers to this ODP so that the two together form a specific check that can be accomplished. In the previous slide, an organization-defined parameter, or ODP, was created to ensure that the organization had selected specific parameters for their security plan. In the example we looked at, the frequency that the baseline configuration was reviewed. The organization could pick whatever parameter seemed appropriate. ODPs can also be created that provide a selection of parameters that the organization chooses from. In this example, we see an example of this pointed to by the purple box. A list of possible values for the parameter are provided. As in the example on the previous slide, a later assessment objective refers back to this ODP. This is shown by the red boxes.
Before we move on to the next set of documents, let's quickly summarize what we've learned about NIST Special Publications 800-53 and 800-53A. The two documents go hand in hand. While you could potentially use 800-53 without 800-53A, the opposite is not true. And if you used 853 without 853A, you would find you would end up doing a lot of additional work which 853A could have helped you with. 853 contains a large number of security controls which can be used by an organization to select from when creating their security program. 853A helps an organization define an assessment process that can be used to evaluate how well they have implemented their selected controls and their defined security program. Between the two documents, there is over 1,200 pages of information. It is some great information, but there is certainly a lot of it. You can use these documents when working with an organization to help them develop their risk management program, but you might find you can trim the number of controls down a bit. Make sure you have covered the 6 core functions from the NIST CSF and select controls that are applicable for the organization and the environment they are in. This is not the only way to develop a program, but it is certainly one method which has supporting documentation. If you decide to utilize these documents, you should make sure to examine Appendix C in 800-53, which is a series of tables that provides a summary of the families of controls. It also provides some additional information such as who and what is commonly the element that implements the control, such as the system or the organization. Another document that provides additional information is NIST SP 800-53B, which has a section where it provides additional information on the various control families, including a judgment as to whether the control falls into low impact, medium impact, or high impact baseline. A link for this document can be found in the reference section of this lesson. If you want to use 853 as a way to develop and organize a security program, you may find that 53B will help you as you start out. 800-53B is entitled Control Baselines for Information Systems and Organizations. It establishes security and privacy control baselines for information systems and organizations and provides tailoring guidance for those baselines. In creating the baselines for your systems, you will be implementing a minimum set of controls, in this case based on SP 853. The guidance talks about a minimum set of controls for both security and privacy. After selecting an appropriate control baseline, organizations should initiate a tailoring process to align the controls more closely with the specific security and privacy requirements identified by their organization. Compensating controls are used by organizations in lieu of specific controls and control baselines. The use of compensating controls is appropriate when controls are tailored out of the control baseline by necessity, but the protection provided by the controls is still needed to reduce risk to an acceptable level. Compensating controls are often chosen when implementing a baseline control is technically infeasible, not cost-effective, or the control implementation negatively affects organizational missions or business functions. Here is a portion of Table 3-1 from 853B. This shows the first three access controls from the access control family. Notice that the chart contains not just the overarching access control, but the enhancements as well. Notice also how this document is tightly associated with 800-53. The major part of this table is in the last three columns, where the recommendations exist for which controls should be included in low impact, moderate impact, and high impact security levels. Notice in this table it shows that AC1 and AC2 should be included for all levels. This doesn't mean that all of the enhancements for AC2 are included at the low impact level. However, enhancements 1 through 5 are not included for low impact, but are included for both moderate and high impact levels. Notice also that some enhancements are not included for any of the levels, and 2 are included only at the high impact level. All of this is great and potentially a great place to start, but remember all of this is based on your specific organization and the environment that it is processing in, and its mission and essential functions. Any of these could be modified to be included or not included in your baseline at whichever impact level you choose is appropriate to operate in. One that I thought was a bit interesting was Enhancement 5, an activity lockout. This is not recommended until at the moderate impact level, but for most systems this sort of control is easy to implement and would seem to be something that is so easy you might want to include it at the low impact level anyway. This is of course up to you and your organization. One final item on this table is the third column. A mark in this column for a control means that it is recommended that the control be included in the privacy baseline. This is the information you will find in the 85 pages of 53B. Hopefully you have picked up on the relationship between the three documents and see how they can be used together to select the security controls that you will include as part of your risk assessment. One final comment on the 800-53 series of documents. The documents speak in terms of capabilities, but they do not discuss specific products. For example, take a look at this section from SP 800-53. This is a screen capture for SC-7 addressing boundary protection in the systems and communications protection family of controls. Take a look at Part A under Control. It talks about monitoring communication. Later, it lists a number of types of managed interfaces such as gateways, routers, malware detection, and firewalls. This is some helpful information, but it doesn't, for obvious reasons, talk about specific products or vendors. You, as a security professional, will still be left with determining which firewall or anti-malware product to use, and you will then also have to address the administration and maintenance of it. Time to turn to our last two documents we wanted to cover in this lesson. Federal Information Processing Standard, commonly referred to as FIPS, publications 199 and 200. These documents are aimed at federal information systems, so won't directly apply to non-federal systems. Having said that, they both have useful information that can be used by all. There is one required video that will explain the difference between FIPS 200 and NIST 800-53, which is obviously of interest to us in this lesson. The video is a bit older. One item that it mentions that has changed from revision 4 of NIST SP 800-53 to revision 5 is that the word federal has been taken out of the title and the intended audience defined in the document has been broadened. Having said that, the video does do a good job going into 853 and providing an example of a security control found in it.
FIPS Pub 199, entitled Standards for Security Categorization of Federal Information and Information Systems, was released in 2004. The purpose of the document is to establish a method for categorizing information and information systems. Security categorization standards provide a common framework and understanding for expressing security that, for the federal government, promotes, first, effective management and oversight of information security programs, and second, consistent reporting to the Office of Management and Budget, as well as Congress, on the adequacy and effectiveness of information security policies, procedures, and practices. The determination of security categorization is a function of the CIA of security. The publication has a good summary of potential impacts. FIPS Pub 200, entitled Minimum Security Requirements for Federal Information and Information Systems, was released in 2006. This is very much a companion document to FIPS Pub 199. It discusses the selection of security controls, but does not list any security controls specifically. It lists a number of categories for security requirements, but points to NIST Special Publication 800-53 for the specific controls for the individual categories. These two documents are mandatory security standards required by the Federal Information Security Management Act, known as FISMA. While aimed at the federal government, the guidance can also be applied to industry. Here is a screen capture from the FIPS 200 document. This gives you an idea of the level of detail the document goes into. The name of the document implies that it might provide some real guidance on a set of minimum requirements, but this is as detailed as a document addressed these categories of requirements. The document is only 17 pages long. These are nice high-level statements on the two requirements shown, but as mentioned, if you want to obtain more specific information on specific controls that would be applicable for each, then you will need to go to 800-53.
Section 4 of FIPS 200 addresses the selection of security controls. It states, quote, organizations must meet the minimum security requirements in this standard by selecting the appropriate security controls and assurance requirements as described in NIST Special Publication 800-53, Recommended Security Controls for Federal Information Systems, end quote. Note the use of the older title for 800-53, which included federal as part of the title, where revision 5 has taken that out to have the document be more broadly applicable. It goes on to state, quote, the process of selecting the appropriate security controls and assurance requirements for organizational information systems to achieve adequate security is a multifaceted risk-based activity involving management and operational personnel within the organization, end quote. Notice the term adequate security, which is a nice goal. We don't want excessive controls. We want only the controls that will provide the adequate security. Also notice the reference to a risk-based activity. They are not providing a list of controls you should implement, such as is done with the CIS implementation groups. They say you need to pick out the controls that will result in adequate security for your organization based on its risks. Thus, this is a risk-based approach as opposed to a maturity level approach. Continuing with Section 4, the document states, quote, security categorization of federal information and information systems as required by FIPS Publication 199 is the first step in the risk management process. Subsequent to the security categorization process, organizations must select an appropriate set of security controls for their information systems that satisfy the minimum security requirements set forth in this standard, end quote. We will look at this more in another slide. And finally, quote, the implemented set of security controls must include one of three appropriately tailored security control baselines from NIST Special Publication 800-53 that are associated with the designated impact levels of the organizational information systems as determined during the security categorization process, end quote. If you recall from earlier in this lesson, these could be seen in NIST SP 800-53B. Here is a portion of Table 3-1 from 853B that we looked at earlier. This shows the first three access controls from the access control family. The part of this table we are interested in at this point are the control baselines found in the last three columns, where the recommendations exist for which controls should be included in low impact, moderate impact, and high impact security levels. Notice in this table it shows that AC1 and AC2 should be included for all levels. This doesn't mean that all of the enhancements for AC2 are included at the low impact level. However, enhancements 1 through 5 are not included for low impact, but are included for both moderate and high impact levels. Notice also that there is a column that addresses the situation where you are concerned with privacy instead of security, or in addition to security. FIPS Pub 199 establishes security categories for both information and information systems. The security categories are based on the potential impact on an organization should a security event occur, which would impact the ability of the organization to accomplish its mission or protect its assets. Impact is concerned with the impact on the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information and information assets. FIPS Pub 199 discusses three levels of potential impact as was seen in 800-53B. The potential impact is low if the loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability could be expected to have a limited adverse effect on organizational operations, organizational assets, or individuals. The potential impact is moderate if the loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability could be expected to have a serious adverse effect on organizational operations, organizational assets, or individuals. And the potential impact is high if the loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability could be expected to have a severe or catastrophic effect on organizational operations, organizational assets, or individuals. After we know the security level for our information and information assets, we can then turn to FIPS 200 for guidance on selection of security controls. For low-impact information systems, organizations must, as a minimum, employ appropriately tailored security controls from the low baseline of security controls defined in NIST Special Publication 800-53. For moderate impact information systems, organizations must, as a minimum, employ appropriately tailored security controls from the moderate baseline of security controls defined in 800-53. For high impact information systems, organizations must, as a minimum, employ appropriately tailored security controls from the high baseline of security controls defined in NIST Special Publication 800-53. Hopefully, this provides you with an understanding of how FIPS Pubs 199 and 200 are related to and used with the SP 800-53 series. Notice also that with the control baselines from 53B, we are not quite implementing a maturity level approach, but it is close to it since each baseline specifies specific controls that should be implemented unless they simply do not apply to your organization. What you then do is to add to the list of baseline controls with other controls that are needed based on your assessment of your risks and the risk to your systems and organizations and organizational information. The obvious additions to our list of useful documents that we should be collecting for our library are the 53 series of documents, NIST Special Publication 800-53, Revision 5, 53A, Revision 5, and 53B. Additionally, you should add FIPS 199 and 200 as well. Besides downloading the 5 new documents we introduced in this lesson, there are only 2 required videos. There's also one optional video on Special Publication 800-53 Revision 5 and 800-53B. It is now time for the knowledge check for this lesson. Which of the following documents is also known as the Control Catalog? FIPS Publication 200, NIST Special Publication 800-53, NIST Special Publication 800-37, or NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or CSF. The answer is NIST Special Publication 800-53, and you can add Revision 5 if you want. While we may not have mentioned it in this term, if you know what each of these documents contains, then you should have been able to select the correct publication. Which of the following documents provides a series of control assessment objectives which an organization can add to? NIST Special Publication 800-53B, SP 800-53, SP 800-37, or SP 800-53A. The answer is NIST Special Publication 800-53A. NIST Special Publication 800-53B includes a number of tables that list the various security controls and enhancements seen in 800-53 and 800-53A, and identifies which should be included in low, moderate, and high impact levels. Since the items are considered the baseline, the ones at the impact level you choose should all be implemented. You can add to the list to fit your situation, but you can't drop any identified for your level. This statement is false because you actually are allowed to drop items that just simply aren't applicable to your environment. Now, having said that, I would recommend that you strongly consider all of the items to make sure that you really don't need a control for something that you want to drop. FIPS Publication 199 defines several categories based on potential impact to the CIA of the organization. Which impact level corresponds to a potential serious adverse effect? Low impact, moderate impact, high impact, or very high impact? The answer to this question is moderate impact. This concludes Lesson 13 of Module 7. This also concludes Module 7.